Another question about electability. Do you have any, sir? There's always the question as to whether or not you are in fact viable. Your differences with the Republicans with the rest of the Republicans on this stage has raised questions about whether or not you can actually win the Republican nomination, sir.
Well, we've only had two little primaries so far, so it's pretty premature to decide which one is going to be the candidate. But, you know, when you think about it, if you measured everything I've ever said, every vote I've ever taken against the Constitution, you know, I'm a strict constitutionalist. Are you suggesting the Republicans should write me off because I'm a strict constitutionalist? I'm the most conservative member here. I have voted, you know, against more spending and waste in government than anybody else. So you're suggesting that I'm not electable and the Republicans don't want me because I'm a strict fiscal conservative? Because I believe in civil liberties? Why should we not be defending civil liberties? And why should we not be talking about foreign policy that used to be the part of the Republican Party? Mr. Republican Robert Taft didn't even want us to be in NATO. And you're saying now that we have to continue to borrow money from China to finance this empire that we can't afford? Let me see if I get this right. We need to borrow $10 billion from China, and then we give it to Musharraf, who's a military dictator who overthrew an elected government, and then we go to war, we lose all these lives promoting democracy in Iraq. I mean, what's going on here? And you're saying that this isn't appealing to Republicans? Where did this come about? I think this is a Republican message. I defend the platform. It used to say we got rid of the Department of Education. It doesn't say that. Now, we as Republicans went and doubled the size of the Department of Education. So where have we gone? I think we've lost our way. And then the insinuation that I am less Republican because of that?
Congressman, thank you very much. We have to take one more break. We'll be right back with one of the most contentious issues of the day. Stay tuned.
But we are talking Dodd-Frank. It is the 3-year anniversary, and among the things in Dodd-Frank that have been implemented, the statute of limitations for government lawsuits extended to 6 years from 5. That is going to put Steve Cohen potentially in the crosshairs, but there are still many things that haven't been done in those 3 years since Washington vowed to fix Wall Street with the act, which is now law. In the 3 years, regulators have written nearly 14,000 pages. They've finalized 155 rules, 243 still set to be written or finalized, only 39% done so far. Here's what that 39% has looked like. Roughly 4,000 pages a year, steady progress from ground zero. In year one, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was formed to coordinate against predatory lending practices, as well as new rules to keep governing some banks there. In year two, banks submitted their first living wills to liquidate them instead of bailouts in the next crisis. In the next year, year three, strict capital rules hope to keep banks more liquid. So there are a few tenets that happened each of those years. We know Treasury Secretary Jack Lew said last week at Delivering Alpha that the core of Dodd-Frank will be done by year end. That's hundreds more rules and a few big priorities that will be a tangled web to finish, and here's why. Take a look at these 3 rules. They are going to require no fewer than 8 regulators to finish a lot of these. Skin in the game is a proposal that will require banks packaging and securitizing risky securities to hold at least 5% of that risk. 7 regulators will need to agree on that. They will also need to agree on the trillion-dollar swaps and derivatives market and the way that that operates. And finally, the Volcker rule, which is the big kahuna. It needs 5 agencies on board to figure out how to limit the bank's risky tradings. The banks have been the ones clamoring onto the committee's calendars to make their interests heard. That's another uphill battle here. The Sunlight Foundation calculates more than 1,000 meetings between the big 5 banks and the top regulators. Goldman Sachs tops the list. 222 meetings between Goldman execs and Washington regulators on how Dodd-Frank shapes out. Guys, an uphill battle, 5 months left. There's a lot still to do.
We have achieved a higher average realization for our products. Puravankara stands at 5,408 per square foot and Provident at rupees 3,895 per square foot. The current unrecognized revenue from sales stands at rupees 1,355 crores. We are targeting to launch 18 million square feet, 8 million square feet in Puravankara and 10 million square feet in Provident this fiscal.
A number of other stocks were also buzzing in trade today.
Thanks.
Thanks, Louisa. Well, it's been nearly 35 years since the world first learned of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, but our fascination with Jedi Knights, lightsabers, and Wookiees has not faded. More than 1 million people spent about 5.5 million hours over the long holiday weekend playing the new Star Wars: The Old Republic online video game. The game was just released by Electronic Arts on December 20th. Joining us now is Lou Bassanese, Chief Investment Strategist at Wall Street Daily. So, Lou, tell me, does this mean that Electronic Arts, the maker of this new video game, is really cashing in? Is this a hot stock?
I wouldn't say that it's a hot stock. I would definitely characterize this as a great launch for them. Like you said, they've pre-sold over 1 million units before the launch, and over 60 gamers logged over 60 million hours over the first weekend in the game. Now, to put that in perspective, that's the equivalent of watching all 6 Star Wars movies over 4 million times. So by all metrics, this is a great early success for Electronic Arts, but I'd argue that this success is already priced into the stock. It's up about 25% year to date already. That compares to a flat market. And if you look from the August lows, the stock's up about 17%. So I think really it's tempting to think about buying shares right now because it's been since about 2000 since Electronic Arts has traded this low. But again, I think that all this success of the Star Wars is already priced into the stock at this point.
Now, Electronic Arts is also facing growing competition from companies like Zynga, a social game maker. How much of a threat is Zynga, and do you see an investment opportunity in Zynga despite its massive market cap at this point?
Yeah, I think right now there's definitely an opportunity in the social and mobile gaming space. If you look at Electronic Arts, a company like Electronic Arts, it has about 20% exposure, 20% of sales from that space, whereas Zynga has 100%. But I wouldn't go anywhere near Zynga at this point. It's a recent IPO. I think it's priced to perfection at about 6 times sales. That's roughly double the price to sales ratio of Activision and almost triple that of Electronic Arts. I would instead look to the small cap space to a company named Glue Mobile. Glue Mobile makes online and mobile games across all platforms for all smartphones and tablet devices. It's carrying no debt, ample cash. It's got a blue chip partner in NVIDIA to develop games on the Google Android platform. There's strong insider ownership. They're releasing a lot of games each year. So I think that's more of an opportunity. And given the increased interest and investment in online and mobile media, I think that the company could be an acquisition candidate down the road.
Lou, I have to ask you about Activision Blizzard. I mean, they're the giant in this space, without a doubt, and they have the biggest competitor to the new Star Wars game. Themselves, they have World of Warcraft. Is there an investment opportunity there? They're certainly number one in the space.
Absolutely. I think if I'm looking in the large cap space, I would go with Activision before I went with Electronic Arts. Like you mentioned, the World of Warcraft has over 10 million users. It generates about $1 billion in annual sales for Activision alone. So you've got a cash cow right there that can fund a lot of investment in new opportunities. If you look at Activision, it's trading at a much more reasonable valuation as well. On a forward price to earnings ratio basis, it trades at about 13, which is in line with the market. In comparison, Electronic Arts trades at about 17 times forward earnings. So in terms of just the better value, I think Activision definitely qualifies. The company's also got 2 launches coming up in 2012 in Diablo 3 and StarCraft. So you've got an earnings catalyst on the horizon as well. The stock has performed largely in line with the market this year. So I think the stage is set much more for Activision to outperform in 2012 than it is for Electronic Arts.
Lewis, it's Louisa in London. I'm no gamer by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I just tried Grand Theft Auto yesterday for the first time. My very mild-mannered producer had it. It's a very violent game, I have to say. But aside from that, how does the software environment compare to the hardware environment at the moment? Are you seeing the same type of indication or want to increase sales and newness of product in both areas?
Yeah, I think you've got a division. If you look at the November sales data, you saw just the top line was a 0.4% increase. And that's largely because hardware sales and accessory sales are really weak. Hardware was down 9%, accessories were down 34%, but video game sales were actually up 15%. And I think this is a trend that you can expect to continue when the December data and the early months of the year come out as well. You might get a bump in the console sales over because of the holiday season. But after that, I think most of your sales increases are going to come from video game sales, especially given the launch, the successful launch of Star Wars and some of the other games that are in the pipeline.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lou Bassanese. We'll have to see what happens. And I know those console makers would love it if they started joining the software makers in some of those high growth numbers. Thanks so much for joining us, Lou Bassanese, Chief Investment Strategist at Wall Street Daily. Now, coming up, more analysis on the town.
Another breaking news story coming out of Washington has lit up Twitter and Facebook. Congressman Ron Paul and Barney Frank will be introducing a bill that would end marijuana prohibition. A short time ago, Texas Republican Ron Paul spoke with me about exactly what he's advocating. Take a listen.
Well, removing it from the jurisdiction of the federal government and allow the states to regulate it like they would alcohol. And, you know, this seems to be strange for a lot of people, but, you know, I'm only going back to 1937 where that's the way it was handled. The states always did this, and I'm motivated strongly also because the states legalize it for the use of medicinal purposes, and it is helpful for people who have cancer and are getting chemotherapy. So this is not a huge radical idea. It's something that was legal for a long, long time, and the war against marijuana causes so much hardship and accomplishes nothing. So I would say that marijuana, as far as causing highway problems, is minuscule compared to alcohol, and yet we knew prohibition of alcohol was very bad. So this is just getting back to a sensible position on how we handle difficult problems, and for me it should be the states.
All right, let the states regulate, and yes, I agree with that. That's a free market position. It's a 10th Amendment position. Mr. Paul, one of the debates, though, you came out for legalization of marijuana and heroin. Is that still your view?
Well, you know, I've never used the word heroin in my life when I talk about legalizing freedom of choice. And that one, too, was once legal. And, you know, I concluded that argument, and they sort of got the point when I said, when they were making a big deal, you know, your freedom philosophy means somebody, you know, could use heroin. I said, you know, if tomorrow we legalized heroin, how many of you in this audience would use heroin? Of course, nobody would. So, you know, it's a moot point. It's how you regulate things and whether or not this $1 trillion we spent on the war on drugs, really since the early 1970s, the modern-day war on drugs started with Richard Nixon, and it's a catastrophe, just as prohibition of alcohol was a catastrophe. So, yes, there are regulations for children and the way the states want to handle it, but, you know, it's sort of like saying, I believe in the First Amendment. Oh, that means you're pro-pornography or something like that. It's ridiculous. You know, permitting something to happen doesn't mean that you authorize it or endorse it. It is not an endorsement of what people do.
But do you worry, sir? I mean, look, I'm a recovering alcoholic and drug abuser. I'm coming up to 16 years with God's grace. Do you worry, sir, that this opens the door to more drug use, sets the wrong example, sends the wrong signal? It's an honest question on my part. Do you ever worry about that? You yourself are
because
a doctor.
I think it's much worse because kids today have an easier time finding marijuana than they can alcohol. And how many cases of drug addictions were prevented by the laws? Do the laws really do it? Would it putting you in prison for about 5 years? Do you think that would have helped you? Would that have cured you? No, this is a medical problem. It's not a legal problem. You shouldn't be a criminal because you have a problem with drugs. So I just don't think putting you in prison would have been helpful at all.
All right. Well, I did it through a faith-based self-help program, but I appreciate your point of view, Dr.
The market, Larry, that's the market way of taking care of a problem.
Yes, and I do, and I want to agree with you on why the states should have the jurisdiction on this and so many other things. I think that's exactly the right position.
We should be very consistent.
I got to go. Congressman Paul, you're terrific for helping us out tonight. I appreciate it very much.
Very good.
He's a wonderfully interesting man, Congressman Ron Paul. Very